Welcome to Soul Nutrition, where we discuss the various ways of nourishing our souls. I'm your host, author, speaker, and coach, Reina Rose. Today's guest is Andrea Putting. Andrea is a speaker, author, and expert authority on community leadership who reimagines excellence in communities with ideas and strategies that maximize relationships and connection. A creative pathfinder with over 40 years in leadership, her passion is how we can open up to the rich diversity of our communities and create a safe, inclusive place where all can thrive. Her message of inclusion takes us on a journey beyond the why to where we can, as individuals and a community, have our ultimate impact on the world. Andrea is the founder of Chocolate and Coffee Breaks, encouraging us to share the simple pleasures of life, chocolate, coffee, and conversation. For when we do, we break down the barriers that divide us. Her passion for building community where each one finds acceptance, a sense of belonging, and an opportunity to contribute is reflected in her podcast, Social Mission Revolution. Andrea has been a lifelong member of the Community of Christ. She is an ordained minister and has served in many capacities, including as a pastor, and is currently the coordinator for the state of Victoria, Australia. She is also a board director of Saints Care, the charity arm of the Church of Australia. Andrea comes to us from Melbourne, Australia, and we are so excited to connect across the world and so honored to have you here today, Andrea.
Thank you, Reina. I'm really thrilled to be able to be with you and share a little bit about what I'm playing with, what I'm doing in the world.
Absolutely. Well, there's very few people that I tell them, hey, my world mission in life, my greatest idea is world peace. And they don't laugh. They actually say, that's my mission too. And I had the most wonderful time chatting with you. And we were just talking about both of our missions to bring peace to the world, one person, one community, one country, one world at a time. And I was so excited to just continue this conversation for the world to see.
Yes, and it's a great mission. I just think that peace is the most important thing. But as we know, that peace starts with us, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does. Have you read, just right off the bat, have you read this book called Factfulness?
No, I haven't.
It is an incredible book. Bill Gates said it was the best book of our time. And it talks about these different facts of, that our world has actually been getting more peaceful for generations. We look at these different factors and it's actually been getting more prosperous. He said, however, like the thing to keep us on this trajectory of forward progress that we've really been making, we have to keep peace in the world, and we also have to preserve our planet. Like if we don't do these two things, all this progress collapses.
Absolutely. And you can see that. You just have to think about it. You can see how back in, if you look at the Dark Age, what's called the Dark Ages, how they treated each other. There was torture, and if somebody did something wrong, you would chop off their hand or pull them over the rake. We don't do stuff like that anymore, and gradually life has changed to where, generally speaking, we are far more compassionate these days than what we were centuries ago.
Absolutely. Sometimes when people talk about the God of the Old Testament versus the God of the New Testament, and I say, I really believe God hasn't changed, but we have. And God meets people, however you see God, where we're at, right? And so when he entered, the beginning of time with a warring community that were taking over land, he met them where they were and then changed their hearts over time. And when they were ready for Christ to come down, it was a different narrative that we saw.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're able to open our eyes to see more clearly as time progresses.
Absolutely. And like you said, even since Christ's time, we've seen a lot of brutality and a lot of hopefully social improvement, we think, that we're not, raking someone over the coals or cutting their hands off. We're extending grace. We're turning the other cheek in a way that society has never seen before.
That's right. We've still got such a long way to go.
We sure do. And I love that you are really spearheading this movement of this long way to go that we have. You are connecting people. I connected with you through the coffee and conversation, right? The chocolate, coffee, and chocolate and coffee breaks, right?
Yep, chocolate, coffee, and conversation is what it's all about.
Yes. And so tell us about how when people connect over these simple pleasures in life, what it knocks down and what it really opens up.
The thing that I find is that, well, sitting down for a cuppa, for a coffee or whatever it is something that transcends all cultures and all religions. We all do it. And it's something that we all feel really comfortable with. When we sit down with a nice warm cuppa, we do feel comfortable. It's like something happens where we can sit down and have a chat with somebody. And so the fact that it is something that we are comfortable with takes away a certain barrier to start with. And then we add chocolate to it. I haven't got a chocolate over here. We add a chocolate to it. And chocolate has all those feel-good endorphins that open us up and help us to feel more empathetic. So the combination is a really good combination for us to share with. And what I found is that when I give people chocolate, it just opens people up. It's incredible. I actually walked down the street, my local street, and handed out chocolates just before Christmas. I can't do it now because people would freak out with all this.
You touched it.
Yeah. But I walked down the street and handed out chocolates, and what happened was that people were opening up and they were smiling, and I'd have conversations with people and they were laughing. And there was people that couldn't speak English, but that didn't matter. It was just still this opening up experience. So the idea with chocolate and coffee breaks is that we take that opportunity and sit down with somebody in a place where we're comfortable, where we're both comfortable behind our cups, around a table, and we can start sharing stories with each other. We can start listening to each other's stories, because stories are magical like that. They open up our empathy. When we can start to hear what someone else's story, we start to realize there's a few things we realize. One of them is that maybe they're not quite so different to us. So if you're sitting down with someone who appears to be completely different to you, a different culture, a different religion, and when you sit down and talk to them, you go, wow, suddenly they might just be a mum like I am, or a grandma like I am. They might be wanting to do certain things in the world. And they might have had certain experiences that are similar to what I've had. But then when they start talking about those experiences that maybe I haven't had, the stories of prejudice, the stories of heartache that I haven't been through, because we've just connected, suddenly I can start to feel where they've been. I can start to understand their stories, and it creates empathy in us, so that we can see that. And the research is that, like, Arthur Aaron, a research psychologist from the Stony Point University in New York, he and his team did studies, and they proved that when you sit down and listen to somebody for just 1 hour, you can break down those terrible differences that seemed insurmountable. But you don't just break it down with that one person. It breaks it down with the whole social group. So suddenly you're not just seeing this person in front of you as being the same as you, being someone that you can connect with, you start to think about their whole social group, there might be their culture or their religion or whatever. It might be a disability. You start to see everyone else in that who you had grouped as different as being connected to you in some way. You're able to talk to them and just to understand them a little bit better.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that's what chocolate and coffee breaks is about having that experience of discovering, well, I'd like to think discovering the Christ in the other person is very much what that's about.
I think you're spot on right there. And I think, right now we see in America here so many people that are not Black marching for Black Lives Matter, taking a stand for someone that doesn't look like them, but because they have sat across the table from someone who's experienced these experiences that we never have, that they can understand it and they can stand up and fight for it with them side by side. Another example that, as you were speaking, I was actually just talking to someone about this, about, the Bible calls us to love our enemies, right? And of course, once we love our enemies, they're no longer our enemies in some ways.
It's pretty clever, isn't it?
Right. And one of the things that when I was living in France, one of the churches I would sing at, they had this program for the refugees that were under 18, and they would, the undocumented minors, they would get them registered so that they could be citizens of France before they could turn 18 and they wouldn't be eligible.
Yeah.
One of the boys we had was this beautiful, tall, Black boy from Ivory Coast. And when he was at pool parties, though, you could see the lashings across his back, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he told us one time about his journey, and the reason he became a refugee in France was he was in his village, and because he was tall and strong, he was being recruited by ISIS. And so, he ran to the next village. Well, they found him there. And he ran one more over and they found him there. So he finally hopped on top of trucks, on top of trains. He was imprisoned at one point between, coming all the way across the continent up to France. And that's where he was whipped in the back and things. And he, almost starved this whole journey to get to France where he could be free and not be pursued by ISIS. And it gave me a whole different perspective of praying for my enemies, praying for someone who might be a terrorist even, thinking that my dear friend, who's this sweet boy that I knew, if he hadn't been as courageous, and I'm thinking I wasn't that courageous at 17 years old, 16 years old. So I could have, if I was in his situation with my courage at 16, I'm not sure I would have done that. And someone who wouldn't have taken those risks he took, he was chased by dogs, all kinds of things, would have ended up becoming an agent of ISIS, right? And so I can pray for terrorists in a whole different way than the them I once saw, right? The bad guys that I once saw, and they're still doing bad things. But I can pray for them with the empathy and compassion because I've sat across from my friend who could have become that so easily. And because I've connected with him, because I know his heart and his soul, that he was able to escape from that, but so many weren't. It gave me a whole new way to pray for my enemies.
Yeah. And really, once we start listening to those stories, it's just a whole different world. And we have a lot of issues with people being against refugees. But if you listen to their stories like that, the kind of things that they have gone through to get to another country, just to get to safety, aren't things that we can comprehend, that we can understand. And it's not until we sit and listen to those stories that we start to really go, well, what if I was in that situation? What would I have done? Would have I had the courage that they've had to be able to travel across continents? Like in Australia, refugees have usually got into some rickety boat and sailed this the oceans to
Wow.
get here. And that is just mind-blowing to think that you're going to go through that because of how bad things really were, what you really had to put up with. We just don't see it. We don't understand it until we do have those conversations.
Right. And that's where, like, bringing it back to current events, what's going on now here in America, we have, our protests and things like that.
Mm.
A huge percentage of the people protesting are not Black, in these, Black
Yeah.
Lives Matter protests. And I think about that because we've sat across and we can empathize and we know, this person had a very different experience than me in the very same country, in the very same circumstances. They had the very same um, maybe education and they didn't get the job because, people looked at them a different way than they did me. And
Mm.
I think that as people do have these coffee and chocolate and conversations and they connect with one another, not only do you just empathize, but you're ready to stand up for them too, right? You're ready to say, that's not my plight, but it's still not right. And I'm going to come march with you and stand arm in arm with you. So to do what's right.
Yeah. One of my sayings is it may not be my story, but that doesn't mean it's not my fight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I believe that to really make these changes that are needed, it needs to be those who aren't oppressed that make the difference.
Yes.
It needs to be, for example, if you were someone who was racially prejudiced or causing those kind of situations, who are you going to listen to? Are you going to listen to me, or are you going to listen to the person that you're oppressing?
Right. That you judge and you don't see as equal with you or eye to eye in any way.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they are not. It means that you just don't see that. So you have to hear it from someone who looks like you and thinks somewhat like you and
Yeah.
may have the same culture as you.
Yeah. So I use the analogy of an egg. If you crack it from the outside, you just get a mess and life is destroyed. If you crack an egg from the inside, new life and something beautiful can emerge. So it takes us from the inside to be able to say that this isn't right. This is something that we need to work on to change. Whereas it could be seen like if there was an uprising of for example, Black people in America, if they were the only ones who were saying this isn't right, this isn't right.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of those things that we hear being said, that they're thugs, that they're this, they're that, and so that's not what we need to hear. So when we have the white voices saying that this isn't right, it seems to be it hits home a little bit more. Of course, we still need their voices as well to validate it, but what I'm saying is that we can't be quiet. We have to make our voices heard as well. We can't be the silent majority anymore.
That's right. And I hear, we see here people who are Asian and Mexican and Native and different and white, all marching along with the Black Lives Matter movement. And some people, especially on this network, actually wouldn't agree with the Black Lives Matter movement. But I think it's really important to educate on both sides of the matter. And I see the people, they say, oh, well, all lives matter. And what a lot of people, and they do, of course, but my favorite sign has been all lives can't matter until Black lives do. And so,
Absolutely.
And this is, I see, like Asian Americans standing up for African or for Black Americans, and African Americans and every color and race and culture coming and standing together, that we just need to treat each other with kindness and without judgment because of the way somebody naturally looks.
Yeah. Yeah. There's yeah, we can say that all lives are equal and all are of equal worth, but we don't all have an equal experience of fairness and justice. And that is where that's where we fall down. I mean, it's very easy for us to say, oh yes, everyone's equal, all lives do matter, but they're not having that equal experience that we are having.
Right.
So that's where we need to pick up our game and make sure that they do have the equal experience that we're having.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that you have a podcast, the Social Mission Revolution, and people on there are altruistic. They have altruistic endeavors for social change, for making sure things like this and other injustices in our world, that they stop here, that we are doing something to change this trajectory of the world that's already getting better from what it was. But just as technology has sped up in the last 10 years more than it ever has in human history, that social change for the better, for that people really do get to have an equal experience, that people have the opportunities that everyone has, is really speeding up as well. Tell me about some of the guests you've had on, some of the conversations that you've had on this social change revolution that really are providing hope for the world, that we are going in a good direction.
Yeah, I've had lots of really fascinating people on the show. And part of what I see is important with having the social mission revolution, I sometimes look and go, well, why am I doing them both? But they're very important because we can't just have conversations, we actually have to do something. So social mission revolution is about people seeing that and making that contribution to make a difference in the world. So some of the people that I've had on range from people who are passionate about stopping slavery in the world. And there is a lot of that we, once again, we don't see it. We're blinded to it because if what we don't see, we don't want to believe happens.
And we don't want to pay for what it would mean to not have slavery. I mean, the more and more I learn about human trafficking is that, you know, the place you get your nails done, you may want to start asking questions. Do you get to leave on your lunch break? You know, do you pointed questions that if they start saying, and they probably don't get to leave. They might not be there on their own accord. And you getting your nails done for $10 is, you know, you may need to go somewhere that it costs you more because they're actually paying their employees and they're allowed to leave. And so some of us, you know, don't want to keep a blind eye to it because we're getting a lot of services that are very cheap because slavery still exists.
Yeah. Yes. So then I've also had people who, one of my favourite stories, one of the first ones I had was this gentleman in Melbourne. He was snuggled up in his bed one night and really cold and couldn't get it out of his mind that there was people out in the street sleeping and it was freezing cold and he was cold in his bed with 3 blankets and a heater. How cold must they be? So he started a charity thing where he goes out and hands out hats, gloves, scarves, socks, and a packet of Tim Tams. And Tim Tams are a famous Australian biscuit, which is chocolate. So,
well, there you go. Chocolate makes the world better.
and also a warm conversation. So he and his team go out at night in winter and share in this with homeless people to just give them a sense of that someone cares about them.
You know, that is that warm conversation part is what a lot of times we lack. You know, we think, oh, I bought him a meal or gave $5, but that was one thing. My brother, he passed 10 years ago, but he would always, that was one thing, you know, when he would meet a homeless person, he wouldn't just buy them a meal. He would take them to dinner and find out about their lives and just engage with them as a human. And again, it comes down to that empathy and learning who somebody is, that, you know, just because you met them at a certain chapter in their story, that's not where they've always been. They're human just like you, and they've had experiences. And when you can learn about that, you don't just see someone like, oh, get a job. You know, you see the circumstances that led to that, and can have empathy and prayers and a whole different outlook.
Yeah. It's incredible, because that's comes back to that same thing about listening to people's stories,
Mm-hmm.
understanding where they've been and walking in their shoes for a little bit. Yeah. So who else have I spoken to? I've spoken to people who work with people with disabilities as well. I spoke to this beautiful lady who swims with sharks, and her mission is to help us to start eating more sustainable seafood. And so, because she could see that sharks were, in some areas, were becoming extinct, and how tragic that would be. So it's a whole range of things that people have become really passionate about, that I just can't not do this. I have to do this. So there's lots of incredible stories where people have just picked up and seen this spark of something that really, it's their calling.
Yeah.
It's just that something that you just go, I just have to do this. I don't know why, but I just have to do this. And which, of course, is where I see chocolate and coffee for me. That's something that I've become so passionate about, that I just have to do. So I'm talking to other people who have had these kind of experiences, and it's just amazing. Another one that I've spoken to started this organisation so that businesses, corporations and things can make artificial hands or make water cleaning things that they then take to refugee camps. Wow. So that everyday people can somehow be involved in making a difference in someone else's lives. So there's just so many incredible stories there that just are so inspiring, of how people can get involved, can grab hold of that something that's calling them, which is what I call, it's beyond the why. You don't necessarily know where it comes from or what it's about, but it's calling you, and you have to do it. And I kind of, like I said, I take that back to this whole thing with me, with chocolate and coffee. I have never had the experience of prejudice, of anything like that. But when I start to hear the stories, I just get so passionate about it that I have to make this difference. So they're the kind of people that I speak to on my podcast, is those people who become so passionate about something that is deeply their calling in life, that they have to go out there and do.
So how does a chocolate and coffee break work? How does someone participate in a chocolate and coffee break? Who comes to these? How do they get matched up? Because I know it's usually with someone that you're very different than, that you wouldn't have normally had a conversation with, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a whole lot of different ways you can experience chocolate and coffee. One of them is that you can just to be aware, just to be thinking about that and going, and you meet somebody or something, and you just go, I just can't connect with them, they're different to me for some reason. Then you can use that opportunity to invite people to have that conversation with you. That's the basic of it, and I'd love to see people doing that. But of course, there are other ways of doing it in a more formal setting, where we can have the experience of connecting to opposite communities, such as a Christian and a Muslim community, that you could come together and set up little places, little stations, little tables or something, where two people can just sit down and have a conversation. Or you could be more, you could have 3 or 4 people having a conversation about and just asking those questions, just starting those questions around what is it that we're familiar, how are we the same, I think is always the best place to start. And finding that connection, because that's when we find the connection, when we find how are we the same. And then start to diverse into what is it that's different. How is it that you're different, such in a religious setting? Well, what is it about your religion that you'd like to share with me? What is it that's so important to you?
Yeah.
Those kind of things that just can start us to think. And what is it that your experience has been? How is it that people treat you differently than they treat me?
Yes.
So there's lots of
especially in certain cultures, I think you're really going to get treated, you know, where if I come to your culture, I may be treated very different if you come to mine, or depending where we live, right? I think I shared with you during our first conversation, I actually grew up in a Muslim country, pretty close to you in Australia, in Brunei. And, you know, I had the most wonderful experience among all my friends. And I went to this school, and I think this has sparked my desire for world peace ever since. And also, like, I have this grand vision that somehow God will use my life to bring peace. Not necessarily that we agree with each other, but just that we're peaceful and loving towards each other between Muslims, Christians, and Jews. You know, these monotheistic religions that if we trace back our origins, we all become sons of Abraham, right?
Yep.
And, you know, I grew up in this country, in this international school with Muslims and Christians and Hindu and every race, every religion, and it was so celebrated. Everything, you know, we would celebrate each culture, each religion, each difference as a big part of the beauty of this international school we went to. And it was you know, ceremony. There was a lot of ceremony around celebrating those differences. And then I moved back to, you know, California, United States. And it became like, if you don't wear the same shoes as we do, you can't sit at our lunch table, right? I'm like, wait, we're not allowed to be different anymore? You know, like, not only is it not celebrated, you're not allowed to participate if you're not staying in the mold that has been deemed the best one to be.
Yes. Yeah, it's fascinating that how we have those experiences that make us just stop and think about who we are and where we've come from. And yeah, and I think there's a lot of that people haven't had those experiences. I can see that in my own communities that I live in a fairly white area, and over the past 10 years there's been a lot more refugees coming in. We generally hadn't had a lot of black people in our communities, but suddenly they're there and becoming seen, and it's a new thing for people who weren't used to seeing that. And how do we relate to that? And how do we relate to Muslim women wearing their scarves? And just to see past that. And, you know, I have some absolutely beautiful friends who are in those, who do wear scarves, who are a different colour, and I just can't see how people can treat them any other way.
Right, but then you do see them treated the other way, don't you?
Yeah, when they start telling me the stories. So I think I see how it's very easy for us to not see it, because people don't ask those questions. They don't have those stories. They don't have those conversations, which is why having this kind of an experience opens their eyes to it and saying, well, now I want to know this story. Tell me this story that you have had, this experience, so I can understand. So yeah, that's the simple ways of chocolate and coffee breaks. There are, of course, opportunities for those to open up in coffee shops, which is something that I would like to see happen in the near future. one of the ways that I love to, when I work with groups with, to talk to them about chocolate and coffee, about this whole being a more diverse and inclusive community. One of the ways I love to split them up is to get a box of chocolates and tell them to get their favorite chocolate out, and then go and find someone who has that favorite chocolate and have those who also has that chocolate.
Yeah.
So that's what a fun thing that I do in a group situation, is to split people up in that way. But then, so there is that other opportunities for people to, when they are in their own communities, probably before they go out and share with another community, is to have that conversations around, how do we accept other people into our community? How can we be more inclusive? And just talking about those simple ways of learning to listen to somebody, to listen to their story, so that we do really hear at a deep level what they're talking about. Because we very often have this superficial conversation with somebody.
Right.
How are you? What is it that you do in life, or something, without asking those deep questions, without listening.
How's the weather where you live?
Pretty cold this morning.
Right. But I mean, these things that we ask,
Yeah, I know.
that don't have anything to do with that, true being. I want to hit on something you were mentioning about, starting in your own community, that maybe you don't have people that are that different yet, and talking with each other of how we become more inclusive. I actually belong to a spiritual community in Southern California that they no longer call themselves church, just because sometimes church can turn some people away, right? Some people have been hurt by church. And so
it's the same thing, isn't it?
Right, yes. And so they had a conversation early on, because no one in our particular community was homosexual. And so they said, okay, let's talk about if we were to have someone who was come in, and we just want to discuss this, because you did still have some people saying, well, oh, that's this, or we get to judge that, when it wasn't about right or wrong. It was about loving and acceptance, and loving a person regardless of who they are, or the box that they're in, whether that's a sexuality box or a race box, or that this person is a human, beautiful soul breathed into by the breath of God. And how are we going to react when they don't look like us, think like us, have the same orientation as us? And they had that conversation early on, so that when that happened, any of the people who might have said, well, that's this, or we think about that, it was already discussed that we love people here in this community for who they are, and we shine the light of Christ, and we read the word, and we all come to it, and God, brings our own hearts to where we need to be each, right? And we don't get to judge another person and take the splinter out of their eye when we have plenty of logs in our own, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I really see that as an important step, because some people, if you were to sit them down with somebody who was of whatever, it may be homosexual, it may be of a different race, it may be of a different religion, and they're so blinded by it that they're not ready to listen and have that conversation. So by having that experience within your own community where you feel safe before you bring somebody else into it, helps you to open those doors, and just to start thinking along those lines, and to start maybe seeing a video of someone from that race talking about their experience, rather than having them confronted to start with, just to help break down those barriers, to hear those stories, and then just go, well, okay, this is, to hear the stories before you put the labels onto it, I think is really powerful.
Yeah,
so if they're hearing
the story of those barriers are there, like, you have to acknowledge that you have barriers to be able to break them down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I know that you do sometimes, you do meet some resistance and people struggle to communicate and tell us more of the ways that you break down that resistance so that people are able to really connect. Kind of preparing them in advance is a great way. What are some of the other ways that you help them when they're struggling? You know, maybe they're introverted and they just don't want to go out and talk to people. Or, well, what are some of the barriers that you meet, and how do you break those down?
Well, some of the things that we can do is just to learn about is to notice our own conversational style when we're out and talking to people, and to notice how we may block off from another person. So there's simple things when we're having a conversation of being focused on that person, to be sitting opposite somebody and to keep your focus on them, not to be looking around at the room and seeing who else is coming in, or what's that over there, unless you're both looking at what over as part of the conversation.
That's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down. How do you teach someone? Because I think focus, especially in our culture of let's be on our cell phone every second, or I'm a little bit ADD all the time, I'm looking around, I've never learned to focus and pay attention to anyone. How do you instill that value of look in someone's eyes, empathize with them, be there in the conversation, be engaged as if you were watching a movie in front of you. Although even some people are on their phones during movies these days. I mean, it's the attention span of I mean, we're going up in peace in some ways, but in other ways we're really going down as far as really connecting and valuing another person above the content in our hand or over there or what's going on. So tell me, how do you teach this?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's learning the one-on-one skills of communication. Of if you're uncertain, there is just simple things for us to do, and it is, if we simply put our feet towards somebody where we're talking to it, then we're going to be facing them. We're going to be connecting with them.
Yeah.
We're not looking around at everybody else, and we just put our phone aside, turn it off, and just focus on this one person. And then the listening is, there's different levels of listening.
Tell us about those. Yes.
Either we can have this simple conversation where we're looking for those points to get in our views, get in our ideas, where we have to really hear someone's story, we have to put aside our own ideas.
Yeah.
And we have to become interested in what they're saying. So if, for example, I'm just kind of flicking back to something that finding something that you said you were talking about. So you were talking about your school experience. I could have asked, well, what was that like?
Yeah.
How did you feel? How did it feel when you went to California and suddenly had to have the same as everybody else? Asking those questions that are really about the other person and understanding how they felt and what they were thinking rather than what I'm thinking. And understanding that. And it also helps to have a few simple questions up your sleeve that are a little bit different, that aren't how are you, or what work do you do. There's lots of things you can be asking, even something like, well, what is it that excites you about the work you do? What is it that you really enjoy? Things like that just start to open a conversation that's more personable, that you can then work on to get into the deeper levels. So
tell us a little bit more about how you prompt people with your cards, actually, to be able to ask new questions. Because honestly, to me, that is the premise of a lot of the work I do. I think I'm not out here to change anyone's mind. I'm not here to, even sow the seeds, but simply to till the soil and ask new questions. And so tell us about how you get people to ask new questions beyond what do you do? What's the weather like where you're from? The typical conversation starters.
Yeah, so I created a nice little set of cards, and it's my logo on this. So let me see, chocolate. It's back to front.
Beautiful.
It's back to front. Doesn't matter. Chocolate and coffee breaks. So I said, create this set of cards just with some prompting things. And it's just simple things such as, what are some of the small things in life that make your day better? What I like about this question is that it does start the conversation. It starts, well, this is what for you, it's this thing, and for me, it's this thing. And
what is it?
Oh, yeah, I like doing that. That's great. And that's something else that I might be able to do. It just starts that conversation where you may not have felt comfortable in having a conversation to start with before you get into the deeper stuff.
Yeah. Tell me what it is for you. What are those little things that make your day amazing?
I could say chocolate.
Yeah.
Little things that make my day special. Well, yesterday I spent the day with my grandson. That makes my life special. Things like being able to have a conversation with somebody. This time of year, having a warm blanket.
Yeah.
Rugging up. Things like that make it special. Being able to look out my window, and I have a beautiful elm tree right here at my window. My window is right in front of me, so I've got the sunshine.
Yes, you can see that sunbeam coming up.
I had to close the curtain because it gets too bright this time of day. But being able to look out the window and see nature in all its glory, and see the change with this tree in the seasons. When I look out the other side, I've got Australian bush, so that changes, that it's different. It doesn't have the change of seasons like the elm tree. But I just love to be able to connect every day with the bush and with the nature that surrounds me. It helps to bring me peace and into who I am. So that's really important, and that connection with God that goes with that, of course, because that's the number one thing. That if I was to be completely honest, the everyday thing is that connection with God. Absolutely.
Isn't that what really connects us into all those things that you just mentioned, is that divine consciousness that, I go back to the creation story of God breathing breath into this clay figure, right? That we all have this breath of God breathing us. And when we're connected to that consciousness, then we see the elm tree, then we recognize the bush, then we see the Christ in another person. We can be present to all those things that you just mentioned because of that divine breath within us, that connection to God.
Yes. So what is it for you?
Oh, so many things were coming up. I was just playing my guitar, and I was playing a worship song I wrote when I was 19, and the lyrics are still, the Holy Spirit must have just written it through me, because I didn't understand any of that. Actually, I was 18. I didn't understand any of it back then, and I just wrote this incredible song that still touches me today. My hammock out on the patio right now. I'm in my LA place that I live. Sometimes I'm in the mountains. Having more than one place that I live, I've lived around the world my entire life, so I love being in multiple places and having great conversations with people. I used to call it mind sparring, when we would, like, iron sharpens iron, have these great conversations about God and the universe and the world and how we can make it better, and how, there's arguments and we can come at different sides of the argument and still be in love and consciousness of each other. And so connection through great conversations about deep, important topics, like you're saying, that really matter to people. I think I'm what I call a social introvert myself. I told you before we started recording, I can go out and I can socialize and be quite good. But as an introvert, it's not that we don't like to talk to people. It's actually that we want a deep connection. And when it's surface level connections with someone, that are, it's, how's the weather and what do you do? it just doesn't go deep for an introvert, and we need to go deep on every conversation. We love to learn about what excites people and share what excites us. And so having those deep, meaningful conversations, and then saying, I really like it when you can stay connected to someone that I've had a deep, meaningful conversation with. So those are some things, little things that light me up my day. Oh, and a cup of tea too.
That always helps.
So tell us, how did you get here? How did this, I mean, you came, like you said, you've never experienced racism or any of these things. How did this become important to you? Like, what was the path that said, Andrea, this stuff matters and you need to go tell the world how to love each other and connect with one another better? What led you there?
It was something that happened 5 years ago in Australia, in Sydney, which is another city, 1,000 kilometres away. And what happened was that there was a siege in the Lindt Chocolate Cafe, so in a chocolate coffee shop. And a gunman walked in there carrying an ISIS flag, claiming to do this in the name of Allah, and took people hostage. He held them hostage for, I think it was something like 20 hours or 24 hours. It was a long time. And, the whole country was watching this experience, because this doesn't happen in Australia. It was wasn't something that we're used to. The results of that were that the police eventually broke through, and at the end of the experience, two innocent people were killed, and the gunman was killed. What happened then was that the country, everyone just held their breath. What was going to happen? Would there be retaliations against the Muslim community, as we've seen in other places around the world? What would happen? But slowly, quietly, there was this roar erupted on social media with the hashtag "I will ride with you." So somebody had seen a Muslim person starting to take off their religious garb because they didn't feel safe being seen as a Muslim person in the streets. So they put up "I will ride with you," and that just took off.
Tell us more about "I will ride with you." What does that mean?
Yeah. So what was happening was that "I will ride with you" was a way of saying to the Muslim community, wherever you want to go, wherever you're going, I will be on the train, the bus, the ferry, the whatever mode of transport. I will ride with you. I will sit with you to make sure that you are safe and feel safe. So it was this massive outpouring to the Muslim community to say that this is not your fault.
Right.
We accept and love you as part of our community. So it was like the whole country just standing up and saying, we will not bow down in hate and terror. We will not go out and buy guns.
Wow.
We will respond in love and acceptance.
Wow.
And so that really touched my heart incredibly. So I kind of sat with that it just kind of kept coming back to me over the next maybe 11 months. And then I got to the point, it was coming up. I knew that anniversary of that was coming up, and I'm thinking, why is it that we should wait until there is a tragedy before we stand up and say, this is what we want. This is the community that we want. We want to live in love and peace. So from that, I started Chocolate and Coffee Day for Religious Harmony.
Wow.
So we've had that for 5 years, where I've just encouraged people just to do that simple thing, just to stand, even just to make that statement that I'm having chocolate and coffee for religious harmony on social media, and people would put photos of their chocolate and coffee. And
what day is that? When can we celebrate?
That's December the 15th.
December the 15th. We're going to all have to go have chocolate and coffee for religious harmony. I love
Yes,
it.
so it's been done in workplaces and things like that, and communities have embraced that, where they do just do that. In some cases, it's just doing, like I said before, having those conversations, opening up that conversations that we are a community where we are inclusive of all people.
Mm-hmm.
So from that has developed into, in the past year, people have been saying to me, well, why is it we just do this once a year? We need to, there is a bigger need, there is something greater here. And so from that has become chocolate and coffee breaks, so that, you know, I can spread the news a little bit further afield, to be able to open up other opportunities for people to reach out and to share in that. So it's just become, it's kind of things, you know, things take on their own direction. We
Yeah,
think we see one thing, we've been sparked for one thing, and God has other ideas, and we just have to follow those
all the
along with.
time.
Yeah.
You know,
So
but
that's what I'm finding.
the wonderful thing is he always uses whatever we were doing before to benefit what he really has for us. Nothing goes to waste.
Yeah.
And so, how does someone get involved if they're listening at home? How do they find chocolate and coffee breaks? How do they connect into this wonderful community of religious harmony and world peace and continuing a peaceful stance on the world and contributing to that?
Yes. So if they want to go along to my website, chocolateandcoffeebreaks.com, so it's nice and easy. There's a whole, I've created the website, and you can subscribe, which will give you, it will open up to a resources that I've created on different ideas and different ways you can connect, along with some posters and pamphlets and things like that that you can download and get printed off. So there's that kind of information there. And then from there, I can, if you want to do that, then I can invite you into a Facebook group where I'm just starting, it's just started up to open up and grow a community of people who want to connect and have those conversations on a deeper level.
How lovely. What a wonderful thing. So they can connect through the website, through Facebook. There's a few other ways, isn't there?
Yes, well, there's always my podcast on Social Mission
Yes.
Revolution, which you
Mm-hmm.
can connect with through socialmissionrevolution.com or your favourite podcast station channel, and through my website, andreaputting.com.au or .com, whichever one you like.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so I'm easy to find. I'm the only one in the world, so I'm very easy to find.
That's nice. That makes it nice.
Yes. So in the next little while, my goal in the next month is to get another podcast going where
Wow.
I speak to people along the lines of chocolate and coffee breaks. So I'll be I'll be sharing stories that people have had, and also backing that up with, also once we're speaking to experts in the field on how people can connect and be
Mm.
more inclusive in the world, and all around, you know, just the common humanity of us. And so I'm looking forward to doing that. And now that I've said that on publicly, going to
Yeah,
happen.
the clock's ticking. Well, thank you so much for joining us here on Soul Nutrition. The work that you do truly does nourish the soul, not only of a person, but of the entire planet. And I really admire the work you're doing. I'm really excited to get behind that and do coffee and chocolate in my own different towns that I go to, because it is uniting the world, like you said, starting here with peace, bringing that into one conversation, into a community, and outwards to the entire world.
Yes. So it's always a place to start. And I always go back to that song, "Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me."
Amen. Well, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you all for watching. And again, until I see you next time, may the Lord bless and keep you. cause his face to shine upon you, and nourish your soul.